Shalom, ladies. So our class is going to be on the laws of washing hands from the Hilkhot of the Ben Ish Chai. Okay, so we're going to start. It's Parashat Toldot. Laws of hand washing in the morning. One must wash one's hands after sleeping because during sleep, an aura of impurity settles upon the hands, and it can only be removed with water. It is explained in Yefe Sha'ah that in reality, a similar aura also descends upon the feet, but we are not able to remove it. This was only possible in the Beit HaMikdash, where through its extreme sanctity, the Kohanim were able to achieve this when they prepared themselves each morning by washing their hands and their feet. However, on Erev Shabbat, we are also able to remove it through the sanctity of approaching Shabbat. So basically, this is speaking about the halakha of what do we do when we wake up in the morning, the importance of washing our hands. Not only is it just about cleanliness, it's also about the fact that when we sleep, they say it's like 1/60th of death. So that aura of impurity is because it's similar to us when we're sleeping, our soul goes to a different place, and it's similar to death. In order to remove the aura of impurity from the hands, they must be washed alternately, not consecutively. So when it says alternately, it means like right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, and not 3 times on one hand and 3 times on another hand. There are different kinds of hand washing. There's hand washing for removing the aura. Then there's hand washing when we say hamotzi, and then there's hand washing if we've touched something that we've touched something and we need to do something holy. So those are the different kinds of hand washing that we do. The correct sequence of washing one's hands in the morning is as follows. One picks up the vessel in one's right hand. I actually have a vessel here. This one. People can make their own. So it says you pick up the vessel in your right hand in the morning, in the morning, place it in the left hand and pour water over the right hand. And then you pass the vessel to this hand and like this. So the motion is like 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, and 3. So it says places it in one's left hand, pours water over the right hand, then one passes the vessel back to one's right hand and pours water over the left hand. This sequence should be repeated again twice, so that in all, water is poured over each hand 3 times. So I know in the morning, so I don't lose count, I go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. Or you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to remember, to remind yourself that you've washed both hands. In Od Yosef Chai, it says here, it is our custom to pour water 2 or 3 times over each hand to make them wet before washing them in the prescribed sequence. If the hands are dry, the water initially tends to flow off them without making them wet. So this is also another custom to just pour water over the hands because of the dryness, and to ensure that the aura of impurity is removed. It says some people are particular to put the vessel down on the ground after holding it in the left hand, so as not to take it directly from the left hand, in accordance with the Kabbalistic concept that the left hand must always be subservient to the right, like a servant before his master. I always have to be very conscious of this because I'm left-handed. So it's really helpful to learn about this. Number 2, the entire hand should be washed up to the wrist. So when we do Netilat Yadayim, it's important to make sure that when we pour the water, we're pouring it so that it it washes from the wrist downwards. On Kippur and on Tisha B'Av, these are the fast days, one may wash the fingers only up to the knuckles. So because on fast days, we're supposed to, afflict ourselves, not supposed to, depending on the fast days, some fast days, a person can refresh themselves, can put oil or lotion, and in others, it's completely like here as it says, we only wash our hands up to the knuckles. The reason is given by Rabbi Yaakov Zema's Zichron Livracha that on Kippur, because of the day's extreme sanctity, the aura is diminished. And on Tisha B'Av, because of the day's tragic association, this relatively smaller aura goes virtually unnoticed and thus requires less correction. Our teacher, the Arizal, requires that after having washed one's hands alternately 3 times, one should rub them together. So like here, and it's also important that when washing the hands, you have a basin. So what I usually do, I keep a basin with the water inside like this. I cover the water. And when I do my hand washing, the water is poured into the container. And we're going to learn more about that. It says here, after washing 3 times, then we rub our hands together. Although it would appear from the words of our teacher, the Arizal, that it is sufficient to do so only once, our teacher, the Rashash, Zichron Livracha, writes that it must be done 3 times, and even gives the Kabbalistic meditations for each one. One should follow the ruling of our teacher, the Rashash, Zichron Livracha, even if one is unable to have in mind the meditations. It further appears to me that when one is rubbing the hands together, the fingers should be held straight up and not bent. So like that. After having rubbed one's hands together, one should keep one's fingers pointing upwards and lift up one's hands level with one's head, or at least level with one's face. So this is for the preparation of the bracha. So usually I'll explain there are 2 ways. So there's 2 kinds of hand washing. So in the morning, people follow different customs. So usually what I'll do is I wake up in the morning, I do Netilat Yadayim. That's for when I wake up. And then I prepare, I get ready, I get dressed, and then I do Netilat Yadayim with the bracha. So then that's when I lift my hands up. I do the 3 times alternatively, and then you lift your hands up straight like this, in line with your face, like this. And it says the bracha al netilat yadayim should be recited immediately after lifting one's hands, in order to comply with the requirements of the Holy Zohar that the hands not be lifted up unnecessarily, and the hands should remain lifted until one completes the bracha. So I would do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lift my hands up. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu v'sutav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. So as I'm saying the bracha, my hands are still up like this until I finished. This is the reason for the wording of the bracha al netilat yadayim, on lifting up of the hands. That's what it means. And on al rechisa yadayim, and not, it says the bracha has to do with, we have to perform the action because the bracha speaks about lifting up your hands. Otherwise it would say al rechisat yadayim, which is to wash, but the bracha is on lifting our hands. And the quote is from Yeshayahu, chapter 63, verse 9, and he will lift them and he will bear them forever. The Kabbalah requires that the elbows be kept in front of the body when lifting up one's hands. And our teacher, Rabbi Chaim Vital, Zichron Livracha, writes in Sha'ar HaKavanot and olat tamid, that one should also cup one's hands while reciting the bracha. So instead of having it straight, that cup the hands a bit while reciting the bracha to symbolize receiving the purity which descends upon oneself when washes one's hands. According to our teacher, the Arizal, the aura of impurity is completely removed by the act of washing the hands, and therefore one must recite the bracha before drying the hands. And it says, this ruling is to be accepted even though it does not concur with that of the poskim, who are of the opinion that the aura of impurity is only removed once the hands have been dried, and therefore the bracha must be recited after drying the hands. So there are varying opinions. Some people follow the opinion, they wash their hands, they only say the bracha when their hands are dry, like as they're drying it. But this opinion is saying that it's better to say the bracha while your hands are wet and then dry your hands. Our teacher writes that one must wash one's hands as soon as one wakes, before touching one's clothes. In cold weather, some people put on their socks before they get out of bed to wash their hands. This is incorrect and they should be reprimanded for it. So what he's basically saying, it's better as soon as you can, as soon as you wake up, wash your hands before you touch anything. Because you also don't want that impurity to spread. Clothes and vessels of wood and metal cannot become impure through contact with unwashed hands. So there's also this commentary says there's a few things that cannot become impure, clothes and vessels of wood. It says if they would become impure, the vessel which holds the water to wash from would become impure as soon as one touches it. Moreover, we find that one may touch one's clothes in order to scratch oneself before washing one's hands. So it's like, okay, you can't, it's better not to touch anything, but if you need to scratch yourself, it's permitted. It says some authorities actually forbid touching one's clothes. This cannot be correct since it is virtually impossible to avoid touching them. And if it were true, the bedclothes would thus become impure every night. Okay, so that's a correction from what I said earlier about spreading impurity. The Zohar also forbids walking 4 amot without washing one's hands in the morning. So 4 amot, I would say, is equivalent to about 4 steps roughly. Thus, one should prepare a vessel full of water to wash from and another to wash into. So this is the vessel to wash from. And this one is an ordinary dish, is one to wash into. That's where you pour the water into. And it should be put at one's bedside before retiring for sleep, so that one should not have to walk more than 4 amot to wash in the morning. And it's, what do we do? It says with the water, do we leave it covered? Do we leave it uncovered? It says the water with which one washes should preferably remain covered throughout the night. So we're going to learn more about why is it important to cover the water. Some of the reasons were, I guess it depends on, if people live in cities, they'll wonder like why, but we'll learn more about that. The author of Shalmet Tzibur was asked whether the water must be covered. He answers that, although it is not listed as one of the things which render water pasul for washing the hands, even in an area where snakes are found, nevertheless, the MEHETAVEL, that's the Shulchan Aruch Yoredea, writes in the name of the Gaon, Rabbi Sheftel Zechon Revacha, not to wash one's hands with water that had been uncovered throughout the night. One should certainly not use it to rinse one's mouth. So I was reading somewhere else about leaving water uncovered, and there was one of the reasons was maybe, an animal a snake, or I think it said a scorpion, would have drunk from the water at night, and it could be a risk to a person's health and life, because snakes have venom, and if they drink from that water and a person comes and drinks from it, it's poisonous. So in the same breath, I would say our washing the hands is to remove impurity, so we need the water to be clean. And that's why it says you should certainly not rinse one's mouth. There is a custom that, some people wash their face and rinse their mouth before they say the bracha al netilat yadayim. The annotation to Shalmei Tzibur adds that this ruling is to be found in the Knesset Hagdolah, citing the Sefer Hasidim. And the quote says, "Every God-fearing and meticulous person should, before retiring for the night, prepare 2 vessels, one full of water and the second empty beside his bed. The full vessel should be stood in the empty one and covered. Ideally, the empty one should be slightly broken, but not so much so that the impure water could leak out." It says, "It is forbidden to wash with water that has been left uncovered overnight because it is dangerous." And this is mentioning what I spoke about earlier. This is particularly the case in the holy city, where snakes and scorpions are common, as ruled by the Peri Chadash. He also adds that water that has been left uncovered should not be poured onto a place where people walk, nor should it be used to wash with, not even to wash the floor. Neither should it be given to any animal to drink, either one's own or somebody else's. It may, however, be given to a cat. So this is speaking about the water. Let's say someone filled a vessel and left the water uncovered. It says we shouldn't give it to any animals, except the only animal that can be given to it is a cat. Shouldn't be left on the sidewalk. The Chesed La'alafim writes further that water or any other liquid is only forbidden when left uncovered if there is so little of it that any poison in it would be dangerous. If there is sufficient water to nullify any poison, the water may be used. So that has to do with the ratio of there are certain ratios that could nullify any poisons, which would be it would have to be a vast amount of water. The Chesed Alafim adds that this ruling is also found in the work Batei Knesiot and should be accepted against the more stringent ruling implied by the Shalmei Tzibur. If upon waking one finds that the vessel to wash one's hands are further than 4 amot away from one's bed, and one is unable to ask somebody else to bring water to one's bedside, one may walk to the vessels in stages of less than 4 amot. So sometimes we're not able to have a vessel beside our bed. So the opinion goes that we basically take 4, less than 4 amot. So it'll be standing and going 1, 2, and then stopping, and then walking again and stopping until you get to the destination of where the water is. Yes, okay, it says if one discovers that the vessels within a distance of 4 amot have only enough water to wash one's fingers to the knuckles, one should wash using what one has, and then walk in stages of less than 4 amot to the nearest source of water to wash one's hands up to the wrists. It says here, what do we do with the water that is in the vessel that we've used, that we've washed our hands with? How do we dispose of it? Where should we how and where should we get rid of it? It says, since the water with which one washes receives the impurity, which was previously on one's hands, one may only wash into a receptacle, never onto the ground. Neither may the water used to wash one's hands be poured out in a place where people walk. It should be poured down a drain or into a lavatory. Even if one washes into 3 separate vessels, all of the water becomes impure and must be poured away. So any water that is used for the vessels must be thrown away in a place that no one can use it. Okay. And this is for the next halakha is for people who, if there are plenty of people using the same vessel, and what to be careful of. So it's also important to draw people's attention to the fact that if too many people wash into one receptacle, it may become so full that it will spill while being carried to the drain. If it does spill, one should pour a lot of clean water off the impure water in order to neutralize it. So sometimes we make mistakes and it spills. It mentions just pouring a lot of water to get rid of, to neutralize the water. The water should be poured away the same day that it was used to wash with and not left until the following night. This is very important. It says, we may not study Torah or pray near a receptacle in which there is impure water until it is either removed or covered, as if it were urine, since its impurity is actually even more than that of urine. So the same way we're not allowed to pray or study Torah where there's foul smells or where there is human or urine or human excrement. It says even more so with this water that we use when we to wash our hands in the morning. It is most important to remind one's wife to wash the hands of even the very small children every day, since they might touch food and render it impure. Moreover, the Chesed LaAlafim writes that this custom has the power to ensure that the children will grow up in great sanctity and themselves become saintly. One should be particular to wash one's face and rinse one's mouth every day. Apart from the fact that it is a healthy practice, also one honors God by keeping one's body clean. So this is the opinion that, not to recite a bracha with an unclean mouth. So there's a custom to wash your face and to rinse your mouth as well. The poskim ha'acharonim have ruled that one should not allow one's hands to be washed by someone who has himself not yet washed. And the examples are, for instance, a servant girl who is nida or by a non-Jew. The Lev HaChaim writes that if one touches someone who has not yet washed his hands, one must wash one's hands again. So this is how important it is. If I wash my hands and then I touch someone who hasn't washed their hands, I have to go and wash my hands again. Some authorities warn against touching the water left on the handles of the vessels from which one washes one's hands, since that water will have become impure from contact with one's unwashed hands and will impart further impurity when touched. However, it is quite clear from the very explicit directives given by our teacher, the Arizal, in Sha'ah Kavanot, quoting a manuscript copy of the Zohar, which was in his possession, the Arizal says, there's no need to worry about this. So we don't have to worry that, I touched the vessel in my hands when I just woke up, so it has the aura of impurity on it. He says, it says, we shouldn't worry about it, neither can it be compared to a similar instance found in the laws of hand washing before eating bread. Since the two different types of hand washing serve completely different purposes, that before eating bread is a rabbinical edict connected to the laws of purity, current during the temple period, while that after sleeping is in order to remove an impure aura. And so it's explaining the differences of why do we wash our hands before we eat and why do we wash our hands when we wake up in the morning. If someone touched food or drink before having washed his hands after waking or after leaving the lavatory, it becomes impure and should not be used as it is. So this is something to be mindful of and to be careful of, not to use food or drink that was touched by someone whose hands were still were not washed. But what happens if someone touches fruit, for instance? It says if it was fruits, the fruit should be peeled. Other food may be peeled if possible, but at the very least, it must be washed 3 times. Liquids cannot be purified, so they must be thrown away. So there are certain foods that are permitted to be eaten, and there are other foods that it's just better to throw away, like liquids. And it says the laws of washing one's hands after sleeping only apply to Jews. A non-Jew need not wash his hands before touching Jewish food, except for the purposes of hygiene. It says here, water, which is pasul, for washing one's hands before eating, is also pasul for washing one's hands after sleeping. And if one use such water, one may not recite the bracha al Netilat Yadayim. Some authorities rule that this only applies to the water itself, but not to the vessel, which makes sense because we use the vessel every day, or to the fact that the water must be poured by hand, and one may still recite the bracha after washing the hands, even if one is unable to comply with the latter 2 points. However, the poskim ha'acharonim agree that all effort should be made to obtain water which is fit in every respect for washing the hands before bread. It's speaking about the importance of why we do it 3 times on each hand and why we use a vessel. Why can't we just wash our hands in any, container of water? So here it says, the impure aura cannot be removed from the hands by dipping them into a bath. On the contrary, the water in the vessel would become impure. The Taz writes that it is clear from the Zohar that in order to purify the hands, one must wash them 3 times in alternate order, as described above, which we mentioned earlier, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If one dipped one's hands into mikveh, the hands would not become purified, although the water itself would not become impure. So this is emphasizing the importance of observing this mitzvah to remove this aura when we wake up. What do we do when you sleep during the day? Sometimes people need a nap, or Shabbat, people have a Shabbat nap. It says if you sleep during the day, you must wash your hands as described, but it's not necessary to pour the water into the receptacle if there's nothing available. So if you don't have, a dish, but maybe you could go to the sink and pour and wash your hands that way, that's okay. It says, but we don't need to recite a bracha. Rav Avraham Sharabi writes in his work Divrei Shalom that one need not wash one's hands at all after sleeping during the day or after midnight, and brings support to his ruling from the Mikdash Melech. However, the Emet Le'Yaakov rules that we may only rely on this when there is no other alternative. Otherwise, one must wash one's hands without reciting a bracha. So if we sleep during the day, we don't need to recite a bracha. Our teacher Rashash indeed rules that if one goes to sleep after midnight, it is not necessary to wash one's hands on awakening. However, this refers to specifically a situation where one had awoken at midnight, recited the Birkat HaShacha, and engaged in the study of Torah, and later gone back to sleep, thus fending off the aura of impurity. Okay, so this is great. So if someone goes to sleep before midnight, wakes up, someone goes to sleep after midnight. Okay. Yeah, before it speaks about going to sleep before, and now it says going to sleep after midnight. They'll be studying Torah, and then they go to sleep. They don't need to wash. That's what the Rashash says. And it says the ruling of Avraham Sharabi cited earlier refers to this situation and must also be understood in similar vein. Nevertheless, in this instance as well, we should all accept the ruling of Emet Leakov that one should rely on this when there's no other alternative. So if one cannot, I guess in situations of like, and if someone's traveling or in an airplane where they can't, but they were awake after midnight and they were studying Torah, then you can go by that ruling. If one only went to sleep after midnight without having recited the Birkat HaShacha, one must wash one's hands and recite the bracha upon waking. Okay. It says, if one went to sleep after midnight, but recited Birkat HaShacha and Tikkun Chatzot after midnight, and engaged in Torah study, and later went back to sleep, one should not recite a bracha when one washes one's hands in the morning. However, if one did not recite the Birkat HaShacha, but only recited Tikkun Chatzot after midnight and engaged in Torah study, I am uncertain whether or not one should recite a bracha over washing one's hands. The general custom is to recite a bracha. So there's different instances when whether we should recite a bracha or not. It seems that if a person sleeps after midnight, studies Torah, and then goes to sleep, they still have to wash their hands, but they don't have to say a bracha. And what happens before midnight? So if one rises from sleep before midnight and has no intention of sleeping again that night, one should wash one's hands and recite the bracha upon awaking. Parshat Vayeshev. If one slept one's night's sleep before midnight, one should not recite the Birkat HaShacha until after midnight, but one may recite Birkat HaTorah even before midnight. If one awoke close to midnight, one should wait until after midnight in order to be able to recite Birkat HaShacha and the Birkat HaTorah in the correct sequence. If one wishes, one may recite hymns and other songs of praise until midnight. And it says there's a custom in the Holy City, in the Kabbalistic Academy, to wait until midnight to recite the Birkat HaTorah. If there is not a long time to wait, if there is some time until midnight, most of the Kabbalists recite the Birkat HaTorah and study Torah until midnight, when they will recite the Birkat HaShacha. So Birkat HaShacha can only be said after midnight. And there are some who just choose to wait until after midnight in order to say everything together. If one did not go to sleep before midnight, but intends going to sleep after that, one should not recite the Birkat HaShacha until the next morning. So this is about, before it was talking about the hand washing, now it's talking about the bracha. Do we say the bracha? Do we say Birkat HaShacha? Do we not say it? Even though according to our teacher, the Rashash, one may recite the Birkat HaShacha straight after midnight, our custom is not to recite them until morning if one has in mind to go to sleep. Okay, so now this is connected to our hands when we're sleeping and everything. It says one may not touch one's mouth, nose, ears, or eyes, even if they're closed, or any other opening with unwashed hands after sleeping. So if we wake up in the morning, we say moda'ani, we shouldn't like touch our ears, touch our nose, any part of our bodies, we should avoid touching them until we've done Netilat Yadayim. It says, if you feel the need to scratch in any of the places, like an itchy eye or whatever, one should do it with one through the clothes. There's an opinion that says the Gaon of Ya'abez rules that it is only forbidden to place one's finger inside one's mouth, eye, ear, or nose, and that one may touch them from the outside. The Gaon of Hida rules against this. And as the Zohar clearly states that one may not even pass one's hand over one's eyes. Wow, so like this. The Hida also finds supporting from his ruling from many other halachic authorities. One should not take snuff before washing one's hands. This is in some places in the world, people, snuff is like tobacco. Says should not take it before a person has washed their hands. It says, since not only does the snuff which one takes receives impurity from one's hands, but so does all the rest in the box as well. So someone touches it, then everything becomes, receives this aura of impurity. Okay. And the sequence for hand washing. It says one must wash the hands in the sequence described above after any of the following: after waking from sleep, after entering a lavatory for any reason. It says after intercourse, after entering a cemetery, after being within 4 or more of a dead person, and after touching a corpse. So these are situations in which it's important to do Netilat Yadayim, to remove these auras. It says after coming into contact with a corpse or having been in a cemetery, it is customary to wash one's hands and not to dry them afterwards. And it says this custom has nothing to do with impurity, it is simply in order not to forget the dead person. Therefore, if it happens to be very cold and it is uncomfortable to let the hands dry by themselves, one may dry them with a towel. This is what happens if you go to the toilet. If one only puts one's hands inside the lavatory for any reason, one should still wash them. But since one's whole body did not go inside, it is sufficient to wash only once. And it says, but if you wash your hands 3 times, then you will certainly be rewarded for doing so. This is important. It says food which is taken into the lavatory also becomes impure and should be purified by peeling or washing as described. Water which has been taken into a lavatory should be used to wash with, since it has already become impure itself. I know there's also an opinion that if you're taking, for instance, food, or you can't leave your bag and it has like a holy book in it, it needs to be covered with a plastic or something, but double covered as a layer of protection. So if sometimes you can't always avoid leaving things out and we have to go with them. So that's also something good to remember. And it says we must avoid walking 4 amot with unwashed hands. After any of what was mentioned above, except after sleeping, since none of the other draws upon a person impurity as powerful as sleep, which the soul literally has a taste of death. After leaving a bathroom or bathhouse, one must wash one's hands in order to remove the minor degree of impurity imparted to them there. It is sufficient to wash one's hands only once, but those who are particular to wash them 3 times will surely be rewarded for doing so. After cutting one's fingernails, Even if one did not cut all of them, it is sufficient to wash one's hands only once, but there are opinions that one should wash 3 times if the fingernail grows beyond the edge of the fingers. The latter opinion appears most reasonable according to the Kabbalah. And it says the different instances in which it's important to wash hands. After any of the following, one must wash one's hands once each for the sake of hygiene. After touching shoes, wearing them or not. So even if it's just shoes and you touch them to move them, you have to wash your hands. Shoes which have never been worn are not included. So brand new shoes don't come into that. After touching any part of the body which is usually covered, after washing one's hair, after inspecting one's clothes for lice. That means also if scratching, like scratching your hair, if you scratch your head, you need to wash your hands afterwards. It says, even if one did not find anything, and after touching allows. So if someone's looking for lice and they actually find it, they should wash their hands. Parts of the body which are usually covered includes one's face, neck, throat, and arms up to the elbow. And says in the case of a man, 2/3 of the way of the upper arm on which one puts tefillin. It says in those countries where women are accustomed to wear long sleeves and to button them at the wrist, the forearm is considered a part of the body which is usually covered, and if she touches that part of her arm, she must wash her hands afterwards. So if women who wear clothes and they cover up to their wrists, she touches that part that's usually covered, she has to wash her hands. It says nursing women do not have to wash their hands after touching, after breastfeeding, since they are then regularly uncovered. Yeah. Okay, yes, so this is basically the laws of washing one's hands after waking up. There's also something completely separate of like washing one's hands before eating food, which is totally different kind of hand washing. So yes, I hope you enjoyed it and looking forward to next week's class. Shavua tov.